Patrick Moran, President of Greater Ottawa County United Way, and I have the joy of being somebody who's able to lead the Ottawa Housing Next initiative. The Ottawa Housing Next initiative is a collective impact work where the whole community came together in a big community conversation and heard some data. We shared some data points that we'd got out of a study called Alice that we'll chat about later, I'm sure. And that data really showed a housing crisis for the lower income population in Ottawa County, in Holland, Zeeland, and all of the towns that we serve here in Ottawa County. And that conversation said, what are we going to do about this? Whose fault is this, was one of the questions we actually asked. And it came out of that community conversation that no one sector is to blame. It's not the government's fault, it's not the non-profit's fault, it's not the business's fault, it's not the person's fault. Everybody's got a piece of this puzzle. So we said, well, if everybody's got a piece of the puzzle, who's going to fix it? Is it the government's job to fix it? Is it my job to fix it? Is it your job to fix it? And the answer was, no, it's kind of everybody's job to fix it. So Ottawa Housing Next as a collaborative was born. So the data set we've had for years. United Way does a wonderful project every 3 years for data. But it was always difficult to get down to that town, to that neighborhood level. So we've got state data, we've got local data, but tough to really pin it down to a family. And then we had an opportunity to work with our state association and a group out of Rutgers University. And they come in and they do this data study where they actually go in and say, in this community, how much does it cost a single person to rent? How much does it cost a family of 3 to rent? What is the daycare costs in that community? What are the food costs? So instead of having this poverty number, which is kind of an average of Zeeland and New Orleans, they had a specific number that said, if you're a family of 4 with a kid under 5 and an 8-year-old, this is what you need to earn in this community to live here. And then it compared that with how many people actually earn that. And it allowed us to have this threshold that said that particular family, we have 8 family types we look at, that particular family has a threshold. If they do not earn this threshold, they can't afford to live in that community without help. And we found that 35% of the population in Ottawa County is actually living in a community at a wage that is below that threshold. The city of Holland, it's over 40%. What we do know is that for the 2 lowest income, they're called quintiles, so there's 5 sets of income we look at. And for the 2 lowest sets of income, they've had no change in their real dollars when we adjust it for inflation since before I was born. Since 1966, there's been no real increase in spendable cash for those lowest 2 quintiles. But in that same time period, rent's gone up 19% and mortgages have gone up 21%. So 2 of the classic family types to look at are a single person and then a family of 4. And that family of 4, if they're looking for a 1-bedroom, they can afford that at $9 an hour. But putting a family of 4 in a 1-bedroom apartment is not exactly appropriate living. A family of 4 with 2 kids needs at least a 2-bedroom. And a 3 would be nice, but it needs at least a 2-bedroom. For a family of 4 trying to live in a particular community in Holland, it can cost up to $53,000 to live in that community with no help. So $53,000 is a household income of $23 an hour. So again, that's where you look at, you really have to be earning $12 an hour each with 2 families, with two working members of the family. But what if you're a single parent family? That whole $23 requirement to be able to afford to live there is on that one person. And there's not a lot of new jobs, especially at the entry level, that come in at $23 an hour. So the 2 questions there are really good questions for Ottawa Housing Next. First is, what do we do to close the gap? And second is what happens if that number gets bigger? So the first thing that we're working at in Ottawa Housing Next is that it's actually quite a simple concept. It's just really hard to get done. And that is that in our community, we know to keep our businesses viable that we need different levels of income. We can't have everybody earning 6 figures or the company would go bust. So we've got to have these different levels of income to be able to stay competitive. But if we're going to do that, then we have to create community opportunities that are priced for those individuals. We need to have the houses on the lake that are worth $5 million that people who earn that much can buy, but we also need to have 2 and 3 bedroom apartment rentals that are priced the way we know they need to be priced. The interesting part of the model is who's going to build that housing and who's going to price it appropriately. Because we drive around and we see a lot of new developments going up, but how many of those developments are built to match the actual community? They're not. And it's just a paradigm that it's awesome that we get to build these wonderful communities to live in, but they're not representative of our actual population. So we actually end up being very segregated, that this is where all the lower incomes are and this is where all the higher incomes are. And it's an interesting philosophy. What if we built neighborhoods that if 35% of our population earns below the threshold, can we build a neighborhood that has 35% of its housing that is appropriately priced? We don't mean subsidized, we mean appropriately priced and appropriately sized. We have groups that are working on what incentives can we provide developers, what tax credits can we find for developers, how can we put people with land who are interested in doing this together with people who are interested in building it, together with incentives that would work for them. And that's what's really been missing in our community, is all of those things coming together. We have wonderful developers. We have mission-driven agencies doing work, and we have charitable people interested in helping, but they've not found each other that well. And the ones that have found each other, Habitat for Humanity, Home Core, Good Samaritan Ministries, now that we know the scale, we know that our current partners are going to have to change to reach that scale. For example, if an agency serves 50 people and we're 8,000 affordable units short, how do we take that and scale it to 8,000? And the answer is we don't take that and scale it. We take the whole picture and we scale each part up appropriately, and then we'll start to reach these numbers. So that's the answer to how do we solve it for now. But there is a fear coming down the pipeline for me, in that let's say that the 35% number drops and we're able to get a group of those people up above the ALICE threshold, or provide them appropriate housing so it's now affordable. Doesn't mean their income has to change, but it's now affordable. Well, this county could be 400,000 people in 20 years. If the percentage drops, but the number of people increases, you don't have to be a math major, which I'm not, but you don't have to be a math major to realize that even though we might be solving the problem, it's going to numerically get worse as the community grows and we continue to build housing at a disproportionate level. We're going to need more and more of the low-income housing, probably at a faster scale than even we can move to now. That's one of my favorite questions, because it allows me to remind and share with people what happens when, as a community, we don't support the people in need in our community. And what happens in Flint and in Detroit when a community can't support their people and they move out? Well, they've been bulldozing communities and turning them into flatlands because it's easier to do that once all the people have left. So what stands in the way of that happening here in the Holland Zeeland area is that family that just needs that little bump, that little help to get by, they can go to a local food pantry, they can get government support on food subsidies, they can get assistance with their housing, they can find scholarships for preschools. And the community's work and the government's, local municipalities, state and federal government's work to take that person from where they are and just give them that little bit extra they need. Remembering that these are working families. They're, for the most part, out there working hard as many hours as they can. But the numbers don't match. They don't get to set rent prices. They don't get to set food prices. They have to live in the community they're in.